With 3 prime ministers in 2 months, people are hoping that the ascension of Rishi Sunak to the post of prime minister in Britain will cause the political upheaval that has characterized the politics over the last 2 months to end. They're also hoping that the Sunak regime will usher in good governance, steady governance, and a certainty of movement of the administration, putting an end to the missteps under Liz Truss, who resigned as the shortest serving prime minister in British history. To talk about British politics and issues that are important to key groups of people, including us here in the Caribbean, matters concerning immigration and the general economy, I'm speaking to a veteran of the politics, a woman who has achieved many outstanding things. Her name is Diane Abbott. She has strong Jamaican roots. She's been a member of parliament since 1987, member of parliament for Hackney North and Stoke Newington. She has been the shadow home secretary. She's been the first black woman to run for the leadership of the Labour Party and created history in 2019. She was the first black woman to stand at the dispatch box, Prime Minister's questions, facing off with Dominic Raab, who was deputizing for the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Diane Abbott is my guest today. Ms. Abbott, good afternoon. Well, good afternoon my time, good evening your time.
It's evening my time.
Excellent. All right, let's get right to it, because even in your long political history, and I should also tell the viewers that you were at one point a television presenter. You worked in that role for a number of years before you turned to politics at the council level. Have you seen anything quite like we have witnessed over the past 2 to 3 months in British politics?
I have never seen anything like it. And I think we need to be clear. British politics has never seen anything like it. Liz Truss only lasted for 55 days. That is completely unprecedented.
And as we deal with our third prime minister in quick time, let's talk about the man who, well, the domino, the fall of the domino that caused all of this to happen, Boris Johnson. The Boris Johnson, let's call it the Boris Johnson supremacy at the helm of British politics. What kind of Britain was Boris Johnson leading? Is that Britain different from the Britain that Rishi Sunak is leading 2 months after Boris?
Boris really didn't have a concept of the type of Britain he wanted to lead. His concept was about him, Boris, being prime minister. That's the thing that mattered most to him. And he was prepared to dodge and weave and do all sorts of things to stay prime minister. And even now, when his own party told him to go, when we had the problems with Liz Truss, he thought he could come back. So Boris's government was about Boris. He was dishonest. He thought the rules didn't apply to him, which was his problem. That's why he was removed as prime minister. But Boris was about Boris.
But here's the thing, Diane Abbott, that I'm intrigued by. There are so many flaws to the man, and yet he was the most critical actor and factor in the Brexit vote. He led a Conservative Party to an 80-seat majority. People from the outside, Diane Abbott, seem to love the man. Is it that Britain was misguided in loving a rascal, someone who, as you say, doesn't play by the rules, and someone who's all about self? Britain loved the man.
Well, a lot of Britons did love the man. And that's why he got away with things for so long. Other politicians would not have got away with what Boris did. But it was his own party that in the end just turned against him. And then they went for Liz Truss, who was a complete disaster. And now they've got Rishi Sunak, who is a lot more sensible. and practical than either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak. But I think the problem the Conservative Party has is it remains split over Brexit. The majority of Conservatives were very passionately pro-Brexit. But there's also a minority, a powerful minority, who still regret that we're not in the EU. And the Tory party is still fighting those fights. It's still split. And the danger is, however calm and sensible Rishi Sunak is, those Brexit wars will erupt again.
I hear you on the point of Rishi Sunak being calm and sensible, but I detect in that, Diane Abbott, a seeming satisfaction that Rishi Sunak is at the helm of the Conservative Party, because you know, and you've won many elections, you've never lost one since 1987 when you first got in, you know that at the end of the day, it's a lot about governance, but it's all about politics. I get that Labour loves the fact that Rishi is in charge because they don't believe Rishi can lead the Conservative Party to electoral success. Am I right?
I think you may well be right, actually. He doesn't have Boris's charm and charisma.
And devilry, and the devilry that people like. There's a devilry about politicians that some people fall in love with. Boris Johnson has that in spades. Sunak doesn't have it.
No, he doesn't. Yeah, you use the right word. Boris had a devilry. And so whatever happened, whatever lies he told, whatever went wrong, people would say, oh, good old Boris. Good old Boris. You know, it was all part of the deal that he did things, sort of the devilry. Whereas Rishi Sunak is almost a bit boring, really. So we'll see how it all works out.
Yeah, but you see, Boris Johnson was attacked from all sides from the moment he stepped in after winning the leadership contest to replace Theresa May. Then, of course, the Brexit fallout and the way that sections of the media were against him. Then the electoral success, which, gave him a sense of power that many people thought he would never have had the chance of experiencing. But he was still being barracked on all sides. Liz Truss barracked on all sides. I get the impression that the barracking won't be the same for Rishi Sunak, because there are people who want Rishi to stay in place, because they're saying the moment we go to a general election and this nice, sensible guy is leading the Conservative Party, it's all over, because he cannot inspire people to vote for him to keep the Tories, the blue side, in the government office. And that's a reasonable conclusion to draw, isn't it?
Yes, I think there's a lot in that. Rishi, maybe lots of things. He's very sensible, he understands about the economy and everything else. But he's not inspirational. And that will be his problem.
Let me ask you, Theresa May's downfall, and there were times, Diane, when I felt sorry for Theresa May. The way she was attacked, it was almost, well, you said it without using those words, the Conservative Party cannibalizing itself, because she was attacked by so many members, powerful members of her own party, which is why she didn't manage to see Brexit through. And then if I look at what happened with Liz Truss and how factors and forces within her own party turned on her, ultimately forcing her to give up the ghost. What does it say about women in leadership in the modern day Britain now, leading powerful political institutions, the way that Theresa May was gotten rid of, the way that Liz Truss was gotten rid of, had to go, and then we look at the things that Boris Johnson survived? Is there something in there to say the gender of May and Truss hastened their departure from high political office?
I'm not sure that's right. I think that men would have got away with some of the things they did or didn't do, but I'm not sure that their problem was all about gender. Theresa May's problem was all about Brexit, that she couldn't get her party to vote for the type of compromise Brexit that she wanted. In fact, Brexit's been very damaging to Britain, and had Parliament and the Conservative Party gone with her compromise Brexit, which I think still allowed access to the single market and so on, would have been a lot better off. As for Liz Truss, Liz Truss was remarkable. She believed she had a belief that the important thing in terms of growing your economy was to cut taxes. Now, I've heard that said before, but I just thought, the idea that you cut taxes and you create growth was just a thing right-wing politicians said in order to justify cutting taxes to rich people. But Liz Truss really believed it. She really believed it. And it was her downfall because she cut taxes so suddenly and so savagely that the markets, investors in Britain, bondholders, they took fright. And the pound started to collapse in value. And so her problem wasn't that she was a woman. Her problem was that she was a woman of exceptionally rigid beliefs, which panicked the international financial markets.
Hear you on that. Well, just to clarify, that I wasn't saying that the fact of her womanness caused her downfall. I was just saying that had a role to play, because you mentioned Theresa May. Don't forget that when Theresa May was trying to push through her package of reforms for Brexit, she had some senior figures in the party on her side. Ken Clarke, then the father of the house, was on her side. Other crucial and fundamental figures in the Conservative Party were supporting her. Boris didn't have Ken Clarke on his side when he took charge, but he had Jacob Rees-Mogg, the European Research Group, the ERG, pushing him. The fact, so what I'm driving at is this. Both leaders at the time had important figures in the party supporting them. But what I was saying is that maybe if Theresa May was Thomas May, then the way that certain things were interpreted and the way that some people were vehemently set against what she was trying to do in getting Brexit done, perhaps it would have been different were she Thomas May and not Theresa.
It's not just what was happening in Parliament. It's what was happening outside Parliament. And that period when Theresa May was Prime Minister saw the rise of UKIP.
Yes. And
UKIP was a highly nationalistic, xenophobic organisation, which at one point had a lot of support. That wasn't reflected in Parliament, but it was reflected in our European elections. And the point about Europe is it sold an idea of coming out of the point about UKIP was that it sold an idea of coming out of Europe, and it was basically about being able to keep the borders secure. It was basically an anti-foreigner.
But Diane, I'm very happy you mentioned UKIP, because I want to ask you, UKIP led by Nigel Farage would have, based on how he does his politics, he to me would never fall in line with a woman at the helm of the Tory party. Look at how his approach and his behavior changed when Boris Johnson took charge of the Conservative. It was easier to bring UKIP, to almost collapse UKIP into a Johnson-led Conservative than it was for him to align UKIP with the Conservative or the Theresa May. So I think it supports my point.
No, I think it was a political difference. UKIP wanted complete Brexit. Theresa May was trying to have some sort of compromise.
Yes.
And the UKIP forces in the political world just wouldn't allow that.
Yes.
Boris went head for leather for a complete Brexit with all the damage that has caused the British economy. So I don't think it was a gender problem. I think it was a political problem.
He basically gave UKIP what they wanted. All right, let's take the break, Diane Abbott, and come right back and pick up this conversation. Fascinating discussion with a Labour MP of 35 years experience. Never lost an election, she hasn't. And she has much to say about the state of British politics now. And we'll ask her about her role in the current Labour Party under the leadership of Sir Keir Starmer. Back with us on the conversation, very special guest with me today. Her name is Diane Abbott. She's the daughter of Jamaicans who immigrated to the United Kingdom, and so you can understand the issue of immigration very close and dear to her heart. She was the Shadow Home Secretary in the Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn led it, and she has many accolades under her belt. And after walking into Parliament for the first time in 1987, the first black woman to do so in British political history, she is still going strong. Diana, but if we may remain with the government for the time being, what is your personal view on the reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary?
I think it's a terrible thing. I think it's the most damaging thing that Rishi Sunak has done at the very beginning of his tenure as Prime Minister. Suella Braverman, it's not just that she apparently has had many breaches of protocol in sending confidential documents to outsiders, but she's also quite an unpleasant woman. I mean, she said a few weeks ago that she dreamt of seeing photographs in front of the newspaper of immigrants being flown to Rwanda. And this Rwanda scheme is a ridiculous scheme. We've already given billions to Rwanda, which is good for them. But I don't believe it's going to work. But she's obsessed with it. She's obsessed in putting immigrants on a plane and dumping them in Rwanda. And it's a one-way ticket. They don't get to come back. And they're doing it, they say they're doing it now for the people that come across the channel in small boats. But you mark my words, if they were able to make it work for that set of immigrants, anybody that came to this country and they didn't like their immigration status, or there was a problem with immigration status, they'd be flying them out to Rwanda.
Because I'm going to take you up on that. So I see many people making much of the fact that since the announcement of the policy, immigration has continued unchecked. The numbers are still very, very high, notwithstanding what the Conservatives' own targets were. But isn't that a disingenuous argument, though, Diane Abbott? Because it's not as if since the announcement of the Rwanda policy has been able to take effect, because it's been subject to court challenges. So we haven't really been operating in a period where the Rwanda policy is in effect, and that flight that Suella Braverman said she dreamt of seeing being reported on the front page of the Telegraph actually happened.
Listen, the point about the Rwanda policy is, first of all, it won't work. And Israel, I think it was 2018, Israel tried it. Flying immigrants that came to Israel, immigrants of African origin, obviously, flew them to Rwanda. They couldn't speak the language. If the housing was available, it was terrible housing. And they were so distraught at being there. When the situation was investigated a few years later, most of them had fled back to Europe. It's not a workable scheme. And the reason why they're having legal problems with it anyway is because actually, I think a lot of lawyers think it puts us in breach of our obligation under international human rights law. We're supposed to have a responsibility to refugees and migrants. That doesn't mean sticking them on a plane and dumping them thousands of miles away. So it can't work in principle because it puts us in breach of our responsibilities under human rights law, and it doesn't work in practice, which is what Israel found a few years ago.
But if we go back to the appointment of Braverman itself, she wrote a very scathing resignation letter to Liz Truss not so long ago, a few days ago, to be factual. I mean, I was laughing to myself because in terms of the tone of the letter, it was only second for me in terms of its scathingness behind the one that Sajid Javid wrote when he left Boris Johnson's cabinet in the last days when the whole house was tumbling down around Boris. But you know the politics very well, Diane Abbott. For political reasons, we know that a lot of wheeling and dealing had to be done to get Rishi over the 100 MP mark for him to move towards the leadership of the Conservative Party unchallenged. And you know that sometimes you have to repay political faith for political moves that get you into power, keep you in power, or get you into a position of authority. So, given your knowledge of this politics, and your knowledge is deeper than most of the commentators who are shouting loudest about Suella Braverman's appointment, doesn't it make sense for Rishi Sunak to give this job to someone who knows the portfolio he believes and is at the same time repaying a political favor that Braverman and the faction that supports her would have given to him in helping him get the seat of leader of the Tory party?
Well, it was a deal. It was undoubtedly a deal.
There you go.
Because she came out in support of him, and he must have, him and his handlers must have thought those last few votes were important. But he'll come to regret it. He'll come to regret it. In the recent past, She said all sorts of abusive things about Indians overstaying. And that has imperiled a trade agreement we were supposed to be conducting with India. I mean, she's obsessed with this Rwanda thing, which can't work and has already cost this country millions and millions. She's somebody that doesn't, I mean, she says all sorts of things. She's obsessed with immigration. She's obsessed to playing to the gallery on migration. And I think before too long, Rishi Sunak will find that the deal wasn't worth it.
All right.
That he should have relied on getting across the line without her, because she is so obsessive, she's so negative, she's so hostile, and she just will not allow Rishi Sunak to take a more considered view on migration.
You have said unequivocally that the Rwanda policy will not work. So,
Yeah.
all right, the Home Affairs, the Home Secretary is in charge of broadly immigration, policing, and national security. And you shadowed that portfolio. Had Jeremy Corbyn beaten Theresa May, you would have been Home Secretary in that very close election not so long ago. So let me ask you, what policy would work to control Britain's very, very troublesome immigration problem? What is the prescription?
Well, if you're talking about the small boats coming across the channel, which is the thing people are most upset about at the moment, what you could do is actually process these people trying to get to Britain in northern France. Because what they find, certainly up until recently, that most of those people come across in small boats were genuine asylum seekers. I mean, more recently, there's been quite a few Albanians, but most of them are genuine asylum seekers. So you process them in northern France, and then you let them enter the country in the normal way. And the others, you have to cooperate with other EU countries to send them back whence they came. That's how you stop people crossing the channel in small boats. Making it unnecessary by making it possible for them to be processed in northern France.
But question for you, in this period of Brexit, tell us, is it as easy as, process them in northern France, just have an alliance with the French government to have a joint agreement to hold them there while we process them and then determine what to do with them? Is that as simple as you say it is in this period of Brexit?
I'm not saying it's simple. And obviously, Brexit's been very damaging to us. It's been damaging to the economy, and it's damaging in sorting out our migration problems. Because actually, migration is something, and the problems, it can only be solved on an EU basis.
Exactly. So what are you saying? But hold on. So what are you saying then? So in order to put in the prescription that you've set down, you'd have to reverse Brexit then, because I can't see the French in this environment, in this period, after what they went through with the Brexit situation, being amenable to the kind of partnership that you have said will be needed for migrants to be processed in northern France before they are allowed entry to the British mainland.
It's not easy. It would require monumental diplomacy, but diplomacy is supposed to be Britain's strong point. So yeah, it's not easy, but it's the only way. I mean, since it's been announced we're going to have this Rwanda policy for people coming across in small boats, the numbers of people coming across in small boats has risen and risen. So clearly, sticking them in a plane and sending them to Rwanda isn't going to work. Not least, as I say, because there's all these legal objections for this plane. To take off.
But Dan, I could interpret that another way though, because in the wake of the announcement of the Rwanda policy, swiftly followed by not even swiftly followed by legal threats, swiftly followed by legal action against the policy. And while the policy was being mooted, there were threats of legal action. Then when the policy was put into effect, immediately legal challenges. People, if I'm a smuggler especially, trying to send people to the UK, I'm going to start smuggling people post-haste to beat the deadline before this policy, if it manages to defeat the challenges in court, takes effect. So I don't think the fact that there's an explosion of migrants in the wake of the announcement of the policy means that the policy isn't working.
The policy cannot work. As I've said to you, Israel tried that same thing a few years ago, and it did not work. The people they sent there were so horrified by what they found, they fled. Whatever way they could manage, they got back to Europe. I mean, the policy will work for Rwanda because they're going to make millions of pounds. It will not work in terms of trying to deal with what's seen as a migration problem. As I say, two things need to happen. We need to process a lot of these claims a whole lot quicker. I was taking evidence from some Home Office officials this week about migration. And one of the problems is that it's, currently we've only processed something like 90% of the claims that came in the last 12 months, which is ridiculous. We have to have a more efficient system of processing claims, and then it's more realistic to say to people, well, now you must go home.
Question for you. I hear you clearly on what needs to happen for the illegal migration. And I hear you clearly on what you think of Suella Braverman's policy. Of course, it's a carryover from when Priti Patel was the Home Secretary.
Yeah.
All right, good. Does your prescription accord with your party? Is this the way the Labour Party as an organization, as a political unit under Keir Starmer, is this their vision for immigration control as espoused by you?
Well, my party definitely is opposed to Rwanda scheme. Keir Starmer said that very recently. We're definitely opposed to that scheme. And we definitely believe that part of the problems with migration is just the inefficiency and the bad organisation of the way the government handles it. So yes, I think they think that the Rwanda scheme is both immoral and impractical and will not work. And the party believes there's a lot we could actually process as immigration claims much more quickly. And we do believe in working with our European neighbours on this and other issues.
But you see, I've never heard, I've never heard your party represent its policy as an alternative to the Rwanda policy, as clear, they've not made it as pellucid as you have in your answer to me now, which is why I was wondering, all right, Diane Abbott is clear on what to do for immigration. Maybe it is that her idea is running ahead of what her party's position is, because I know that the Labour Party opposes the Rwanda policy. I know that the Labour Party believes that the immigration issues are not being managed well, but I've never heard them say, all right, rather than Rwanda, this is what you do. So again, I'm asking you, are you ahead of your party where that is concerned? Are you in sync? Do you and the party have different ideas about what the fix is because you're united on what the problem is?
I'm on the Home Affairs Select Committee, which is one of the standing committees of the House. And as I said, this week and going forward, we're taking evidence on migration, particularly the small boats coming across the channel, but migration in general. And it's an all-party committee. The chair is, in fact, Labour MP, Diane Johnson. And as a committee, we do strongly believe that Rwanda cannot work, and we need to be a lot more efficient and a lot better at processing migration claims. So that's certainly the view of a committee of the House. And as I said, if you listen to Keir Starmer, he's very clear that we are opposed to the Rwanda policy, and we think there must be a more efficient and a more humane way of dealing with migration.
Well, you see, I love how you answer that question, that Keir Starmer has been very clear in his opposition to the Rwanda policy. But again, I say to you that he has not been very clear on what his fix is. I know what Diane Abbott's prescriptive approach is. I know what your potential fix is. I can't say the same for the Labour Party as an organization. Nevertheless,
Keir Starmer's fix is to have a much better run immigration system, much faster processing. Because if there is anything which could be a draw, it's not people trying to get in before the Rwanda system is imposed. It's the incredibly slow process in terms of actually processing the claims, and the fact that thousands of these asylum seekers, they're not allowed to work, so they're kept in hotels at a cost of millions a day. And Keir Starmer's fix is very clearly a much better run, much more efficient immigration and asylum system, but also a fair one.
Yeah, hear you on that. Stay where you are, Dan, but we're taking another break, coming right back to pick up more, talking about the issues in British politics that are of importance to the ordinary people. Governance must take precedence now because there's been so much upheaval in politics in the UK in recent weeks. Well, obviously, because of historical ties, there are many people in this part of the world, not just in Jamaica, but throughout the Caribbean, who are keen watchers of British politics. And there are so many people in the UK who look and sound like us. And it's always a pleasure to see them in and around the seats of power. Diane Abbott has been there since 1987, a trailblazer in many respects. A speech she gave in 2008 regarded as the Parliamentary Speech of the Year. I'm sure she remembers that. That's not so long ago. That was only 14 years ago. It's been a long time, yeah? Those are the levels that this woman has scaled history-making in more ways than one. Dan, if I may ask you this way. When you were campaigning initially for the right to represent Hackney North and Stoke Newington in Parliament in or around 1987, there were members of your own Labour Party who didn't think you were going anywhere. They thought, oh, well, this must be this is a waste of time, this is a joke. You didn't get the respect, you didn't get the support. Not just yourself, but others who were non-white. Keith Vaz, just to name one other, yeah? When you won, and it's been a long road to a direct seat of influence in the Labour Party. You had that, no doubt, when Jeremy Corbyn was in office. You formed a very good partnership with him. It was clear you had his respect and he yours, and you made for a good team. We know about how the member from Islington North, Corbyn, got ousted as Labour leader. In the time since Corbyn's departure and your continued membership of the parliamentary caucus for the Labour Party in the House of Commons under Keir Starmer's leadership, do you still feel wanted as a British Labour MP? Do you still feel valued as a leadership MP, as a British Labour Party MP?
Oh, I still feel wanted and I still feel valued, particularly by the wider community. Yesterday, I went to speak at a Cambridge college. It was a Black History Month event, and they had all the Black students from all over Cambridge. And I had a very positive welcome from those Black young people. Today, I was at an award ceremony organised actually by, I probably shouldn't mention your rival, but Gleaner RJR Group. They had an award ceremony, Black History Month award ceremony in London. So I certainly feel wanted and needed by the population. And there are still issues to fight on. I mean, you'll be well aware of the Windrush scandal. And most of those people have not had their compensation. It's as if they're waiting for them to die. They don't actually have to pay them any compensation. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot to fight for. And I certainly have the respect of the population as a whole, both black and white. Clearly, my part of the Labour Party is not absolutely in power at this time, but I certainly feel wanted and I certainly feel there's still a lot to do.
But you see, again, this comes from years of practice for you. You can answer these questions and speak so many truths, and then not give me what I want. But here I come again, Diane Abbott. Here I come again. The issue of your value in the party. The question is, from afar, it looks as if the Labour Party itself, the parliamentary caucus, it looks as if decision-making and the preparation of policy positions, it seems as if it happens around you. It happens and, Diane is there, Diane is taking care of the community, taking care of her constituents as she's always done, of course, and dealing with other things tangential even to her role in the party. But where Labour Party Central is concerned, where it is that there was no decision made by Corbyn's Labour Party that you didn't think that Diane Abbott had a hand in. Nothing of import that the leader didn't bounce off you. Diane, what do you think about this approach? You get the impression from afar you don't enjoy that relationship with Keir Starmer. And as I said, the politics happens around you. Is that true?
I certainly do not have the relationship with Keir Starmer I have with Jeremy Corbyn. And I've known Jeremy Corbyn for 30 odd years, apart from anything else. But also, we shared the same political vision. With Keir, it's very different. I've didn't know him very well, although we were in the same shadow cabinet with Jeremy Corbyn at one point. I wouldn't claim to be a confidant of Keir Starmer. And there are different ways to have influence on the policies of your party. And I still believe I can have influence.
Hear you on that. Let's go to this issue now, Diane, concerning the representation of minorities in both parties. As a student of politics since my high school days in the mid to late 1990s, if I had gone to space and come back, and you told me that, of course, everybody knows about Margaret Thatcher, but you told me that the Conservative Party not only had Theresa May as a Prime Minister, it had Liz Truss as a Prime Minister, it has a brown man, Rishi Sunak, the son of Indian immigrants from Kenya, as a Prime Minister. It once had a cabinet, populated heavily by women and black and brown people. I would have said, are you crazy? Which Conservative Party? Not the Conservative Party that is known as the party of white patriarchy in the United Kingdom. How is it that the Conservative Party, Diane, has leapfrogged the Labour Party in terms of the representation and the championing of the rights of the ethnic minorities in Britain and women, to the extent that it can boast 3 women prime ministers and is the party with the first non-white prime minister in British history?
I wouldn't get carried away. If you look at how people vote in Britain, I mean, 80% of black people vote Labour. And I think even with South Asians, you're talking about 60 or 70%. So at a grassroots level, people continue to vote Labour. There's no question that at a parliamentary level, you're seeing more diversity in the Conservative Party at a cabinet level and now with the leader than I could have dreamt of, if I'm honest with you. But bear in mind, these minority MPs and minority cabinet ministers, they're almost all very wealthy men indeed. And in fact, the way of understanding their politics is not by looking at the colour of their skin, but it's looking at their bank balances. I mean, Rishi Sunak is a millionaire, his wife is a billionaire, Sajid Javid is another millionaire. These are very rich men. And, you know, the Tory party has always found space for millionaires.
But Dan, it can't be as simple as that, because I'm saying to you, yes, I know what you say about voting patterns and especially how the blacks vote in the UK. But it is true that the Tories, if you trace back to when David Cameron was the Tory leader, yeah, and what they did to ensure that minorities were promoted within the Conservative Party. Nadim Zahawi hasn't had the cabinet positions he's had because he's rich. Yeah, Rishi Sunak is wealthy, of course, and his wife are very wealthy, but his rise is also down to the fact that the conditions were put in the party for him to be promoted. I mean, notwithstanding Labour's past, Labour talks about the black vote that it commands. Labour has not produced a Kwasi Kwarteng as the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Well, look what happened to Kwasi Kwarteng.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, but he goes down in history. If he dies tomorrow, and I hope he doesn't, I hope he lives many more years, his epitaph will read, former Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I'm saying the Labour Party doesn't have a system, Diane Abbott, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, it doesn't have the system to fast track and promote the minorities the way the Tories have done, and the Tories have outflanked Labour in this regard.
I have to be careful how I put this, but it's certainly true, as you were intimating, that when David Cameron took over the leadership, he had a Conservative Party which looked behind the Labour Party. It didn't look as modern, it didn't look as progressive in a general sense. And Cameron was determined to do that. And he did deliberately go out and headhunt black and brown people to become MPs at the time of his leadership of his party. And you've seen the results of all that with the numbers of black and brown people in the Tory cabinet, and now a man of Indian origin as leader. And I think that does all go back, to be absolutely fair, to the efforts Cameron made to headhunt people. They all turned out to be millionaires, of course, but to headhunt people and encourage them to be MPs and encourage them to go forward. And that's absolutely true. And it is striking that the Conservatives have had 3 women leaders and the first non-white Prime Minister. And I think the Labour Party cannot afford to rest on its laurels.
Ooh, well, let me challenge that. Does the Labour Party even have laurels in that regard to rest on, Diane?
Oh, yeah. As I said to you, the majority of black voters, Asian voters, Kurdish voters, whatever you want to say, the majority of them vote Labour. And they vote Labour when economically you might think they vote Tory. But they know the Tories' history. They know the Tories never did anything for their parents, however well they personally are doing. And so we continue to have the majority of the black and Asian and minority vote. And we continue to have some of the most vocal black and Asian politicians, including my good self. So, I mean, representation is important. Representation is important. I've always thought that. And I think it's a good thing that we now have a Prime Minister of South Asian origin. But the important thing is politics. The important thing in politics is results. And I would argue that the Labour Party, when it has been in government, has achieved more in practical terms for black and brown people than the Tories ever will. I mean, it's great Rishi Sunak is Prime Minister, but he's talking about big cuts. Now, those big cuts in public expenditure will hit black and brown people hardest, either because they're dependent on those services or because they work in the public sector. So yes, representation matters, but results matter. And in terms of dealing with institutional racism, the Tories never have and never will achieve any results.
Well, let me ask you this. We have a minute and a half to the final break, Diane. I want to ask you, Rishi Sunak and his wife are estimated to be worth a net worth of about £730 million. I mean, that's an eye-watering sum of money. What effect does that have, you think, on potential voters? Do they see Rishi Sunak as Tory party leader and say, you know what, if this man, through his financial dealings, has been able to set himself up to the point where he's worth this in concert with his wife, I am motivated by this, I want to be like this, I want to trod this path, I will support Sunak and his party? Or are voters likely to look at it and say, well, yeah, he's just part of the moneyed class, he is disconnected from my reality, and I can't support someone like that and his party at the ballot? Which way are voters likely to look, using Rishi as the object of the comparison?
Rishi's worth billions. I mean, he's not just your regular rich man, he's worth billions. And I think as we get close to the general election, people will start to understand that he doesn't really understand their reality. And I think that will affect the voter. It's not as cut and dry. I think many Hindu voters will vote for Rishi because they'll be so pleased and proud to have a Hindu as leader of a major political party. But I think most other voters, as the general election comes nearer, will start to believe that, because, not just because he's rich, but because he's so rich, he doesn't really understand their reality.
Hear you on that. Let's take our final break and come back and finish this conversation with the lady, Diane Abbott. Back with us on the conversation, my final segment, with one of the most prominent and durable members of the British political establishment in the last almost 4 decades now, 35 years. Diane Abbott has been serving the constituents of Hackney North and Stoke Newington after winning in 1987, and she continues to do well by her constituents. Dan, just to finish up the line that we were pursuing in the previous segment, how far away are we from seeing a black Labour Party leader?
Well, you know, the thing about politics, you never know. I imagine a few years before Obama became president of the United States, people would have been saying that it would be unrealistic to see a black man as president of the United States. So there's lots of young black people out there who I believe could be an ornament to the Labour Party in Parliament and could go on to be leader of the Labour Party. After all, Rishi Sunak has only been in Parliament for 7 years, and now he's Prime Minister. So I think it should not be that long before we have a black leader of the Labour Party.
Yeah. On the Obama point, you would agree, though, that the moves that Condoleezza Rice made and her impact in the White House, General Colin Powell, a man that you can identify with, given both of you share the same roots, and you almost saw something coming. I remember, I don't know if in your spare time you listen to rap music, Diane. I don't imagine you would, but I remember years ago the late rapper Tupac Shakur rapping that we aren't likely to see a black president. That was in the 1990s, but based on the reality he was seeing then, it wasn't possible. But as time went on, you saw things which suggested that if blacks were being given such important offices to manage in the US political architecture, then it was possible that a black man could, and a black man did. The Labour Party, when you look at the people, well, you are the best example. You flew very, very high in that Labour Party, and but for a few seats here and there in that hung parliament, you would have been a part of a Labour government under Corbyn. And then the question about a black Home Secretary under Labour, you would have answered that question and maybe perhaps more. But you think that based on how the party is, how the party embraces minorities, how the party sees itself as mirroring those who vote for it. Because that's the key thing again, Dan. You, of course, correctly say blacks vote Labour and minorities are more likely to go Labour. But it is the Conservatives who are more reflective of multicultural Britain than a Labour Party, the Labour front bench, if you look at it. The Conservative front bench, by contrast, is more representative than the Labour Party front bench. And that's why I found it pertinent to ask you as an insider if you thought that a Labour Party in government and a Labour Prime Minister leading that government was something that we can be realistic about seeing.
Well, just on the Conservative Party being reflective of the society, the persons of colour on the Tory Party front bench, as I said to you, they're very wealthy men. You're not seeing Bengalis from Tower Hamlet or Pakistanis from Bradford. You're seeing men and women, actually, who largely are Asians whose parents came from East Africa. It's a very particular group in society. So I said, and I agree with you, representation is important, but results are just as important. And do I think you can expect a black leader of the Labour Party? Yes, but when I became an MP 34 years ago, no one expected to see black MPs, actually. I'm an optimist, and I always believe that better must come. So I do believe that we can see a black leader of the Labour Party in my lifetime. That may be foolish optimism, but then I'm a foolish optimist.
Yep. Better must come one day. There you go. We're agreed on that. The issue of Diane Abbott in 2022. I know that you've had a hard time dealing with racists. I know that you've had a hard time with people, even within your own party. There's the issue of the messages in the WhatsApp group that were leaked, that you reported, and that you say, your party leader hasn't said anything to you directly in terms of an apology or anything like that. We know that you've come under fire for the stances you've taken in your advocacy. Do you think that you're operating in a safer space these days? Or are the problems of the trolls, the abusers, and the racists who are accusing you of racism, do you think it is as bad as it has been?
I think the rise of online made a huge difference to the amount of racism that somebody like me saw online and the volume of racism. And what happened as well is online became an echo chamber for mainstream media. Remember, when I first became an MP, if you were a racist and you wanted to send an abusive letter to Diane Abbott, you had to get some writing paper, you had to write it out, you had to find an envelope, you had to put the letter in an envelope, you had to put a stamp on the envelope, you had to go out of your house and find a letterbox. And you might even have thought, going out to the letterbox, suppose I send this letter and people are able to trace it back to me, I might end up, in prison or something. Whereas now, all you have to do is press a key on your keyboard and send the most appalling, disgusting racial abuse, not just to me, but to dozens, if not hundreds of other people. It is so much easier now. And the anonymity is very important. You couldn't be anonymous in that way when I was a new MP. You might sort of sign a letter anonymously, but it was relatively easy to trace you. In the online world, you can't trace people. So it may not be that there are more racists around, but the racists are far more visible, far more voluble, and are able to make their presence felt in a way they weren't 30 years ago.
Do you, well, let me not phrase it this way. Let me phrase it this way instead. How do you feel about how you are depicted by the Tory-leaning media, electronic and print?
It's hostile. It's been hostile. And as I said to you, I think that the horrible stuff you see online has become an echo chamber for the mainstream media. And they kind of repeat each other. To be honest with you, I try not to read a lot of the online stuff. My staff read it for me. And to be honest with you, I always feel that if I let the hostility of right-wing media, not to mention the crazy people online, if I let that affect me, I'd be letting the people that depend on me down. So I try not to look at it. I try not to let it affect me because it's designed to undermine you. It's designed to stop you doing your work. And I will not allow that to happen.
For someone who has read your history, Diane Abbott, and accepts that you are a woman worthy and deserving and due every respect in the world because your achievements have been solid. You've not come up on the largesse or the sympathies of anybody. You've built this political career yourself. There are many of us who read your political career and have that acceptance. And at the same time, that same group of people, and I put myself in that group, see you in an interview that those who are opposed to your politics used to hold up and say, aha, look at this interview where she was shaky and she was weak. This is what Diane Abbott really is about. And then they'll mention, for instance, the infamous Nick Ferrari interview where we were talking about the police numbers and the wages and everything else, and the sums weren't adding up and all of that. How do you feel about the career you've built and people using one interview that didn't go quite so right to typecast you as someone who isn't intellectually sharp and who isn't worthy of speaking on behalf of a party such as the Labour Party in Britain?
It speaks to the racism in the society. I mean, white male politicians, whatever party, make mistakes all the time and they're brushed aside and the world moves on. But if it's a black woman, you make one mistake, people repeat it over and over and over. But it speaks to the racism in the society, and that is what I have to fight. That is what I have always fought. But I'm glad of the support that I get, both from other politicians and in the community.
Britain recently announced that for those persons from Peru, Colombia, and Guyana who are planning to stay for less than 6 months, up to 6 months in the UK, the visa requirement has been waived. In other words, Guyanese, Colombians, and Peruvians visa-free travel to the United Kingdom. And of course, in our neck of the woods, Diane, there are people, I hope you're jumping up. Oh, so how Jamaica is not on that list and everything else? What would you interpret as a strategy behind that move by the UK government at this time?
Well, I know a lot of Jamaicans feel very loyal to Britain. They felt very loyal to the Queen, the late Queen, and they have a lot of love for Britain and so on. But the sad truth is, and you see it with the whole Windrush scandal, which was largely about Jamaicans. You see it with Windrush, you see it now with this visa situation, you see it with the plans they had and the plans they carried out to fill planes with the Jamaicans and fly these Jamaicans back to Jamaica. Sadly, the love that a lot of Jamaicans have for Britain is not necessarily shared by the British. I think that's the kindest way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. All right. As we end, Dan, and you look back at the career that you've enjoyed, and I know the flame still burns bright. It's hard to ask a woman of your experience what are your goals and ambitions because you've done so much already. But seriously though, what is it that keeps you going? What next? What frontier is left for you to conquer personally and then to help the Labour Party to achieve?
Well, I just want to see the Labour Party back in power again. I think it's so important. And I just want to do everything I can, both in my constituency in Hackney in London, but also in the wider community, to move the party forward, to help the party build the kind of policies that will attract people and make it certain that we can win the next general election.
Excellent. Diane Abbott, it's been my pleasure speaking with you. I wish you all the best in your career and the success that you are due, and I hope that we can do this again. Excellent. That's been the conversation for this week.